Good morning, guys. Today we're going to keep things very simple. We're going to be looking at the next lesson, which is lesson 6.7 in our notes and in our textbook, and it is titled Scope of Instance Fields. Now, before we go on in the notes, let's make sure we understand the title here. Scope is when and where a variable can be seen within a piece of code, and don't forget what an instance fields are. Instance fields are your private instance variables. Sometimes they can be public, but most of the time we make them private. They are your private instance variables that are inside the class whenever you write a class. Okay, remember they can be called instance fields or instance variables. All right, now the main concept of this lesson is that instance fields are visible. That means that they can be seen to all of the class's instance methods. Now, when you write a class, you have your class header, you have your private instance variables, you have your constructors, and then you write your methods for that class. And that's what they're talking about here, that your instance fields are visible to all of the class's instance methods. Now, variables that are declared as instance fields or instance variables in a class, they can be accessed by any instance method in the same class as the field. Notice I said same. Okay, so the scope of those private instance variables is within the same class. Now, if you should have an instance field or an instance variable that is declared with the public access specifier instead of making it private, it can be seen from code that is outside the class in a different program, like a client program or a runner program. As long as you have created an instance of that class, it can be seen. Now, again, like I said, most of the time, we always make our instance variables private so that they cannot be seen outside of that class. They can only be seen by the instance methods within that class. But sometimes there are cases where it's necessary to make a private instance variable public. Now, we have a new term here called shadowing. Now, as we said, a parameter variable, I'm going to pause right there, a parameter. Think about where a parameter is coming in. That is when you write a method, whether it be a constructor or an instance method, and you're bringing in information from outside of that class from a runner program. That's called a parameter. So a parameter variable, whenever you write them, is also a local variable. Now, when you are creating those local variables within a method, the variable names must be unique. Now, unique means different. There is only one. I have always encouraged you guys, whenever you write the names for your parameter variables, to one, make sure they're different. And I said the common convention that I use is I precede the variable name with an I, meaning incoming or input. I write it the same as your instance variable, but I put an I in front of it so that I can tell the difference between them. Now, a method may have a local variable with the same name as your instance variable, meaning your private instance variables. You can call them the same thing. But if you do that, that is called shadowing. Now think about whenever you have a shadow of your own, whenever light is being cast on you from somewhere, whether it be the sun or some other light source, you cast a shadow. Well, when you shadow something, you're hiding it. Okay, you're covering it. So when you create a shadow or an instance variable that has, or a parameter variable that has the same name as one of your instance variables, the question really would be is how can you tell the difference between them if they have the exact same name? So that's why we don't do it. But you could do it. Java will accept that. And if you do it, this is called shadowing. Now, what shadowing does is if you assign a value to that variable that you created in your method, it will assign it to that local variable in the parameter. It will not assign that value to the private instance variable. So if your intention is to save it to the private instance variable, but you created a parameter name that is the same as an instance variable, it is only going to save that value in the variable for the method, not your private instance variable. So we discourage making your parameter variables the same name as your private instance variables. Make them different in some way. And the way that I told you to make them different was to write it as the same name so that you know, remember they're self-descriptive, so you want to be able to read the variable, know what it's going to do, but make it unique by putting an I in front of it for input. So just make sure your variable names, your parameter names, and your private instance variables have different names. They have to be different somehow. Now let's look at an example here to talk about what we've just said. Here we have an example rectangle class. We have our method header here, public class rectangle. We have our two instance variables. They're private, so they can only be seen within this class. They cannot be seen in code outside of this class. And we have given these private instance variables the name length and width. We have ourselves a constructor here. We can see this is a default constructor. It initializes your private instance variables with the values of 0. And then here's an example of shadowing. So we have a method called setLength, public void setLength. It's a void method, so it's not going to return anything. And we're bringing in a parameter, which is a double value, and we're going to call that variable len. Now, we know that len is going to be standing for length, but we made it a different name here. Now, under normal circumstances, we would simply say, now, let length equal len, and it would assign whatever that double value is to the private instance variable length. But look what goes on inside of this method. Here, we declared another variable called length. Now, when we declared this variable called length, it was inside this method. Then we said length equals len. Now, when we assign this parameter variable, whatever value that is, to length now, it is only storing it right here. And this is called shadowing. This is not the same length that is up here in our private instance variable. So we will not be assigning len, whatever that value is, to the private instance variable. It's being shadowed. It is being hidden. It is being assigned to the length that we created down here in this method, and that is all the further that that value will go. It'll stay inside this setLength method. So that is it for this lesson. The main part is to make sure that if you are going to create private instance variables, once you create those private instance variables names, then don't let any other local variable have the exact same name. Make it different in some way so that it is not shadowed, so that it is not hidden, so that there is no mistake that when you assign a value to your private instance variable, that it is truly going to that private instance variable, not staying stuck in the method. All right, on page 381, you will find a couple of checkpoint questions for this lesson. So that's all your assignment is for today, is to complete these questions. Have a good day.